Hi and welcome to another video. In the last one we talked about Postgres and how to set up the server and access your database. In this video let's talk about alternative database servers on Ispmanager. If you go under Ispmanager databases, you're going to see there's this option called database servers. So let's talk about this. You can just click on database servers and that's going to show you the current database servers that are available, and you saw how we enabled this in the last video. In this video, let's see how we can create another server. These servers will be created virtually. Now, I've not enabled Docker here, and I just want to see what this is going to do. So let's just come here under create server. We're going to call this Mariah S, and this will be a MariahDB server. So type, it will be MySQL, and then connect to existing server. So let's just look for Mariah, and I want to install the latest MariahDB. There we go. So the password to access the database server, I'm just going to generate a password there. If you want this to be the default database server for web scripts, you can select that there. If you want this database to be remote accessible, then you can enable that as well. But let's just go ahead and create the database. Docker installation is required. So this is what I was telling you. I have not enabled Docker. So these additional database servers, you have to run them through Docker. So that means I will have to enable Docker, and I can just click there. So after clicking on fill out, I'm hoping that has enabled Docker, or that has added all the required steps for this database to get created, for this database server to get created. So I'm just going to click on create. And you can see that the database server was successfully created. So I'm just going to come back under databases. And if I go to database servers, let's see if we try to create a database, if we can select our database there. So you'll see that if we come here to create a database, this is a database, the database server that we've just set up. And you can create your database using MariahDB, or you can use any of these other servers. So you can see the database server was successfully created. Now let's go to settings and let's talk about Docker for a moment. I will come here under settings and I will go into software configurations. Docker is there. We're going to enable Docker, and once we enable Docker, you'll see the option for Docker will come here. So I'm just going to click there to enable Docker. Docker is going to install everything it needs to work on Ispmanager. Okay, so you see Docker has been enabled. You're going to see that we have an option for Docker here. So let's see what options we have under Docker. So if you go under Docker, you're going to see that the database that we created is going to show up here. Okay, because it's running as a virtual container in Docker. So that's how you can create multiple database servers on Ispmanager. So if you want to create a container here, you can create a container. You can look at the configuration file for Docker. Cancel that. If you have images, you'll see the images there. You can see right now we have MariahDB, and then we're going to create a container. So to create a container, you can choose what you want to run in the container. For example, let's say you want to run MongoDB. You can see here, there's an option to choose Docker Hub, an image from Docker Hub, or you can choose, if you have images that you've downloaded locally, you can use those. So I'm just going to click back on Docker Hub, and we're going to do MongoDB. I will search for Mongo. And you can see there we have the official Mongo image. I can select the official MongoDB image, and you can use the tag of latest. I don't know if there is a tag for Alpine. So I'll just go with the latest then. And then RAM. So you can limit the RAM. And I'm going to use 250 MB. And you can add a folder mapping. You can select a folder mapping. Make sure you know the folder structures. Maybe you want it to be in www something, or you want it to be in /var something on your server. You can do that there. You can also add folder mapping 2, another folder mapping, and volume. So you can create a new volume there, give them volume a name, and then mount point inside the container. Maybe you're running Nginx, you'll need to point Nginx to something on your server. You can look at all these options in the documentation for Ispmanager. You're going to see what each of these mean under the Docker documentation. And here I'll go with Lite Pro because that's the version I have installed. And if you want to see which plans has Docker, just come here under the Docker documentation. You'll see that Docker is available on the host and Pro versions. So it's not available in Lite version. You have to get host or Pro version. The Docker documentation, read all this to see what all the options here can be used for. And then I'm just going to click on create. It's also important to note that if you make any changes to your Docker container configuration file or the Docker configuration using the command line interface, all those changes will reflect in the Ispmanager Docker interface. And of course, we need to give it time to start running. So it's being created as is always with Docker. First of all, it will download the image, and once it downloads the image, it's going to start the container if there is no error. So once the container has been created, we can just select on it and we can start it. So there's an option for auto start. I don't know if I did not check that. Let's go to container settings, basic settings, auto start. Yes, you can add auto start, restart always, restart on failure. If it is a database server, you probably want it to restart always when Docker starts or when your server starts. And when I set it to auto start, you'll see that it just gets started immediately. If you want it to stop, you can also just stop any container that you're using inside of Docker. If you want to run maybe Redis, you can run Redis under Docker. You can create a container, search for Redis, select the official Redis image, go through the settings. You want it to auto start or do not start. You can select all these options and of course make the data persistent using a volume and folder mappings. And you can also add a port mapping. If you want a port to be mapped to your container, you can select the port instead of the port getting generated. And I can create. So in this video, we've talked about alternative database servers on Ispmanager, and we've also touched on Docker, and you can play around with this. Look at the documentation to see what you can do with it. So that should mark the end of this tutorial. If you have any questions, you can always look through the documentation, or you can contact Ispmanager support, or you can reach me if you still have any questions.